Greetings and welcome back. I'm here to get you up to speed on what news has been coming out as concerns the development of Robocraft 2, also to insert a hearty aside of speculation and opinion. First up, we have heard more rumblings as to the prospect of the first publicly playable version of Robocraft 2 becoming available. FreeJam have not yet announced or committed to a date. We do know that they intend on releasing that first version soon, so that gives me leeway as to when it might become available. I had previously stated that early March of 2023 would be poetic. However, a comment in response to that video suggested that the date might actually be as near as the 22nd of October 2022. Of course, that is just 1 week away, so I would not be surprised if it took a week or two longer. And in my opinion, it is better to wait a little longer than for the first version of the game to have issues. Of course, there will always be teething issues, and part of the purpose of such early builds is to detect them sooner rather than later, so there is that. With that said, there are things that FreeJam have shared about what they intend on letting us players do in this earliest of builds. We should be able to actually build robots. Also to test out our creations, almost certainly in the new test map. Also surprisingly to upload our robot designs to the new community robot factory, and also to test drive other players' robots. Since test driving is specified, it might not be possible to obtain other players' bots as yet, but considering that this is such an early build, I am surprised that test driving is an intended feature at all. The initial release will very likely be a single player experience though, other than being able to interact with other players' builds on the community robot factory. I trust that FreeJam will also be including a button allowing players to report robots, as this would help FreeJam to keep the platform clean. At this early stage, I think that such reported bots shouldn't be removed pending review, but rather that they should take a discoverability penalty depending on the number of such reports received. I know that I am anticipating issues before they arise, but an ability to reduce the impact of problematic design sooner rather than later would be optimal. I wonder what play limits, if any, shall be experienced at this very early stage. Well, that's the information that I have about the imminent release. Now let's talk about the new user interface that FreeJam intends on introducing within the game. Looking at this, I certainly see echoes of tech blocks in the design. One will be able to press tab, or whatever key one keybinds to the inventory, to open the inventory menu. From here, one will then be able to click on the individual folder option to access a subcategory of parts. This is not bad, but I do think that it might be feasible to combine the two inventory screen levels into the one, as per this rough adaptation now on screen. Not needing to click back to select a different kind of part reduces the number of clicks necessary while building, and that is a good thing. The current expected interface should serve well enough, however. And on those user interface panels, we see part categories and blocks, and so let's go over those. First up, block types that are scalable in 3 dimensions. All of these parts can be expanded along 1 or more dimensions, and unless something changes, it is likely that each of them shall cost just the 1 CPU regardless of their actual size. Aside from scalable blocks, FreeJam will also be including scalable plates that can be scaled along 2 dimensions. Each plate is 1/3 of a block's thickness, and this is bound to greatly expand the practical and aesthetic build possibilities for players. Those were the simple parts, but of course blocks alone do not a bot make. FreeJam have announced that they intend on focusing on what will be necessary to build wheeled bots in the first public build of Robocraft 2, and here are the essentials. One sees the pilot seat, the engine, the steering and non-steering wheel axles, and the wheels themselves. And of course, one cannot forget about weapons. In the first build, we can expect to see a couple of variants of 2 kinds of weapons, the autocannon or laser, and the plasma cannon. I am looking forward to seeing how efficiently these can be encased without impacting their performance, but that's just me. FreeGem claims that they are aiming for all fundamental parts logic to work well enough straight out of the box, and without a need for prospective builders to delve into the building system at all. Aside from aiming servos, which I shall get into in a moment, players can choose to insert a wealth of logic, math, and sensor blocks into their builds. Have no fear, I too have a little bit of difficulty envisioning what I will be using these for, and how I will be doing so. And the good news is, I don't really need to know how to use most of these blocks, since the basics of the internal wiring will more or less be done for me. That is my understanding. Thanks, FreeJam. Of course, this is not to say that I don't want to make some cool stuff with these at some point. What I will probably be more inclined to initially figure out the potential of are the various kinds of joints that FreeJam will be including in the game. These are the unpowered ones, which have fixed properties and physics handling that player inputs don't directly interface with, and the spring-related ones will have more properties that may be customized within the build mode, on what appears to be a part-by-part basis. Of course, it would be nice to see a quality of life feature improvement, where a player would be able to attribute labels to parts of the same type and interact with all such parts on a collective basis, for as far as configuration is concerned. If parts within the same group have different configuration values, then there are different ways that one could approach this. Perhaps most useful would be to clamp the minimum and maximum customizable values of a group, such that when a part reaches its minimum or maximum customizable configuration, other parts can no longer be adjusted further in that direction. But there are other ways to go about this. With that being said, there are other joint parts, and this brings us to powered joint parts, which can accept interactions with the pilot seat directly, or through other means of input designed into the build, such as a button perhaps. It is also expected that guns could be connected to different pilot seats on a build, allowing for a gunner seat to take priority when occupied, while also allowing the solitary pilot to control it all in the absence of other teammates within those seats. A more advanced form of these would be the aim servos, FreeJam intend on introducing. Initially the two on screen, but with plans to introduce a third ball joint based aiming servo. These are the parts that will allow players to design turrets into Robocraft 2. One small concern that comes to mind is that the rotational servo seems rather small, a very probable weak point in such a build. However, it is likely that we will see larger scale versions of these servos introduced eventually. Servos too have customizations that allow for more control over general performance. I like that angle limits can be adjusted on this, as this will help prevent a bot shooting itself with its own weapons. And it is to be said that there is the option for players to mount guns directly to their bot chassis without aiming servos at all if they should so choose. It is a possibility. Before moving on from this topic, we have also glimpsed the first cosmetic items that FreeJam intends on introducing into Robocraft 2. A bonus here is that players will be able to adjust the brightness and color of these lighting parts. Parts like these could certainly use being painted in at least two layers, one for the fixture and another for the lighting itself, and I suspect that we will be seeing this sooner or later. Okay, with all that exposition out of the way, let's go bananas. Or rather, let's talk bananas, specifically bananas on wheels, as in response to a playful Discord forum suggestion, FreeJam Chris got to work on Robocraft 2's first banana mobile. That playful builds like this can be viable brings hope that Robocraft 2 will be reasonably accessible to new players, immersing themselves in the build possibilities. And FreeJam were kind enough to compare the two Robocrafts side by side in how long it takes to make a very simple car. Considering it took around 37 seconds in Robocraft 2, with mirror mode eventually introduced, one could expect such times to be reduced further. So, I kind of half take up the challenge myself, but I do take a couple of minor detours along the way, and cross out just beyond the boundaries of the challenge. It's so typical of me to stray from the tried and true. Even so, I hope that you're enjoying the show. To leave the more playful news behind, and to get back to more serious matters, FreeGem have shared interesting information concerning how a remote-controlled vehicle could work within Robocraft 2. In this case, the player is pointing towards a point on the ground, and the unmanned drone on image is driving towards it. This is terrific, and what would also be nice to see is a toggleable panel with available orders, as determined by the logic that is installed into the drone concerned. This could be an instruction to operate autonomously towards a particular goal. Such a goal could be to search for control points in the same way that Robocraft 1's AIs currently chase points when they aren't, prioritizing attacking enemies or aren't hindered by bad bot designs. Another goal could be to patrol a designated area with instructions either to shoot on sight, or to return fire, or not to fire at all. Another goal could be to defend the zone, again with levels of aggression chosen by the player, and the defaults for such set during build mode. A further goal yet could be to home onto a player's location in the event that they are out of their pilot seat, or provide a signal to do so. And a final goal yet could be to scavenge the battlefield for resources if such should become a thing. The more complex the AI of a drone, the more expensive the logic of the drone becomes, or needs to be. And with that, now we come to news from FreeGem about how they intend on making weight matter in Robocraft 2. FreeGem are committing to simulating physics more faithfully than in the previous game. They intend on using engines to power wheels and other movement parts, and they intend for different engine and movement part combos to prove more suited for vehicles of different weight classes. Aside from this, FreeGem have revealed the 3 original materials that they will be introducing into Robocraft 2, which players will be able to apply to parts using the same material painting system that they had previously introduced in Tech Blocks. The 3 materials to be introduced seem to echo the light, medium and heavy blocks of Robocraft 1. Looking at the stats that were revealed with this, it appears that aerium, or light blocks, will initially weigh a little less than half of moderonium, or medium blocks, which itself is expected to weigh a little more than quarter what ladium, or heavy blocks, shall. If there is to be a lights, mediums, heavies relationship between these blocks, then I am inclined to suggest that a more easily grasped weight relationship be sought, such as 10, 20 and 75 kilos respectively. That aside, it seems that aeriums have 80% of the bond strength that moderoniums do, and that moderoniums have 80% of the bond strength of ladiums. This is a more consistent and easy to understand relationship. All 3 have the same levels of friction and bounciness, values that have yet to be defined. I also suspect that a further value that might be nice here would be resistance, where each part has a threshold of resistance to damage, beyond which it begins taking damage normally. If such were to become a thing, then it would be easier to justify a steeper weight relationship between these materials, with aerium at say 4 kilos, moderoniums at 20 kilos, and ladiums at 100 kilos, or in other words, each weight class being 5 times as heavy as the previous weight class. Of course, this strays a fair way from the balance that FreeGem are presently building towards, and it has yet to be determined as to how important it is for players to be able to intuit the weight of parts. So perhaps this is not important at all, it's just a thought. Speaking of thoughts and bananas, FreeGem have given us plenty of food for thought in the form of the next 2 pieces of news. First of all, we have finally gotten more concrete information on how the health system in Robocraft 2 is expected to work. It turns out that in Robocraft 2, health won't be a value that exists within the individual parts themselves, but rather that the effective health value is stored in the one or more connections that it shares with other parts. FreeJam are terming the new system a structural integrity system. Instead of weapons or other sources of damage dealing such to a health pool within the given part, instead such damage is applied to the connections between parts in an effort to sever the bonds that hold them together and thus breaking them apart. It is literally the connections between parts that make up the health of a bot. Furthermore, FreeJam are opting to calculate the strength of a connection between any two parts as follows. The lower of the two parts' connection strengths is taken as a baseline, so if you connect a heavy Legio block with an Aerium light block, the connection strength is that of the Aerium vector fiber block. That is a mouthful. The Aerium light block. If you think about this, a bond is only as strong as its weakest link. If you were to somehow weld titanium and plastic together, then it would make sense for the connection to be as weak as the plastic is, being the weakest material. An alternative to this method would have been taking the average of the two parts' values, and while I would have been fine with the previously mentioned heavy light connection having around the same connection strength as a medium, as a result of such averaging, I also need to keep in mind that it is faster for a computer to determine the lower of two values than to average them. FreeJam's way of doing it would be lighter on processing power, and the logical basis is just as valid. However, there is more to a connection strength than just the weaker bond strength of the two parts combined. FreeJam multiplies that bond strength by the length of the weld involved. FreeJam counts the length of the entire perimeter of the surface area of contact, and it is an interesting choice to do this over using the area of the connection, which would actually generally be a smaller value. For instance, a 2x2 square connection would have an area of 4 but a perimeter of 8. More importantly, a perimeter scales in a cleaner way than an area would. A 3x3 would be an area of 9, and yet a perimeter of 12. Which all adds up to a pretty clever health system, although I do have questions concerning it. Firstly, if the strength of a weld is based upon the perimeter and not the area, then it would mean that a straight edge would have less weld power than either a curved edge or an inner curved edge. This might prove to be a minor issue if such blocks' weights are calculated based on their volumes. It would also mean that any part with an irregular perimeter, like a toothed cog or a star shape, would have more weld strength as their perimeters would be longer than any smoother perimeter would be. Secondly, I do wonder how parts without a connection will play out. There has been talk from FreeJam that an individual block or other part with no connections to other parts will be rendered to be effectively cosmetic in nature, no longer of significance to the grand scheme of things. I wonder if the hitboxes of such things will impact bots, like large solitary blocks causing bots to ramp off them out of control. Or perhaps it will be the case that such parts will just fly off ineffectively into the distance, or have their hitboxes disabled so that vehicles can either drive through them unfazed or toss them around like styrofoam. And thirdly, speaking of rendered cosmetics, a large question remains as to how cosmetic CPU parts will be handled. Will Robocraft 2's cosmetic parts be like Robocraft 1's cosmetic parts and fall off under the stress of a gentle breeze? Or will such parts also behave like normal core CPU parts and have materials attributed to them like any other part, with material, bond strength, weld length, and all, with the exception that such CPU can only be applied for cosmetic type parts? Or will it be the case that players might be able to invest core CPU into cosmetic parts so as to make them less flimsy? It is my suspicion that the second of these options is true, but I am far from sure of this. That's the health side of things, but FreeJam has also given information as concerns the other side of the coin, damage. It appears that FreeJam intends on introducing weapons that each have their own algorithms as to how they deal damage. So far, FreeJam is confirmed to be introducing two types of weapons to the imminent super early playable version of the game: lasers, or autocannons, and plasmas. As one might expect in such a system as FreeJam has devised, lasers deal damage directly to the connections of a part impacted by the weapon, which all experience a health reduction as a result. FreeJam have also elaborated on this in pointing out that if one has a lot of things connected to a part that is hit by a laser, then each of the connections to that block will take damage. There remain plenty of unknowns here, such as whether the angle of an incoming blast impacts the damage received in any way. This news also makes me wonder if damage resistance is a value that shall be applied to materials in the future. So let us move on and talk about plasmas. Plasmas, FreeJam described to be an area of effect weapon which deals damage to all connections within the sphere of effect, and that the amount of damage depends on the proximity of the connection to the center of the blast. Apparently, this will be independent of line of sight or even direct connection, and so plasma will be very effective against bots with intricate structures hidden beneath a thin plate. Since it is an area of effect weapon, I do wonder if one way to counter this would be spaced armor or even larger scaled parts. That might be effective if plasmas only deal damage to connection points within the blast radius. I also note that plasmas are slower firing weapons. While I personally do prefer more rapid firing plasmas, I know that these are just the first versions of the weapon included, and that, with some fortune, we will be seeing more variants come out over time. A third kind of damage that FreeJam have chosen to share more details concerning is their collision damage system. Such collision forces will be in the form of a spherical area of effect, probably centered on the point of impact, and damaging parts based on proximity to the point of contact as well as the amount of impulse fed into the collision by the robot's own masses. This means that heavier bots colliding will cause more carnage than lighter bots, all other variables being equal. Exciting stuff, and even with the first playable build being all but imminent, FreeJam have teased that new weapon classes are in development, with plans for them to have their own unique damage algorithms, like perhaps something a little more Robocraft 1 in nature, or perhaps even the inclusion of physics impacting weapons. More details have to come out regarding this. Other than that, we're teased. And before I wrap this up, I do note that FreeJam have released a new kind of Robocraft magazine called the Robo Herald. Some interesting lore drops included within such, including, bizarrely, Prohibition-era gangster undertones. It also appears that a lot has happened over the course of the change of a century, but I will let you read the juicy details for yourselves. The most obvious flag, of course, is the date of the Gazette. Tuesday, the 18th of October of the year 2263. Well, that is most interesting. What is most interesting about this is that the date is not expected to be a Tuesday, but a Sunday in the year 2263. However, in the year 2022, it is expected to be a Tuesday. Maybe it's a misprint of the Herald, as the same day the following year does happen to be a Tuesday. Well, that is all the news that I have for you for the moment, and it is that time of the video that I get to ask you about your thoughts. When do you suppose that the first playable build of Robocraft 2 will be dropping? Would you prefer it sooner, or would you prefer a little more polish? Are you looking forward to making your own builds, or do you think that you'd rather take other players' builds for a test drive instead? How do you feel about the inventory user interface? Are there any features you hope that will make it into build mode? Will you be tinkering around with the logic of your bots, or will you rely primarily on the automated wiring system that FreeJam will have in place? What kind of bot do you plan on designing? Shooty, tanky, agile, perhaps artsy? Speaking of artsy, what's your favorite fruit? Would it look good as a car? How do you feel about the option of remote controlling your creations from your pilot seat? Were you able to keep up with my news concerning the health and damage systems expected in Robocraft 2? Well, I look forward to hearing your views and I will meet you down in the comments below. But since this match isn't over yet, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for the support you have shown thus far. To know that there are people whom are interested in the content that I put out is heartwarming. While I know that a fair few of you are here exclusively for the Robocraft 2 content and news, I note that I have no plans to stop covering Robocraft 1. There are a number of reasons for this, but there are two reasons that I consider to be important. Firstly, and less importantly, I have a lot of Robocraft 1 videos that have not yet seen the light of day, a consequence of taking a quality over quantity approach. My hard drives are not happy. Secondly, I genuinely enjoy Robocraft 1. I still believe that the game has a lot of potential even as Robocraft 2 looms over its shoulder. However, for that game to shine in the way it was always meant to, it would be necessary for at least three things to happen. Firstly, it would be necessary to give matchmaking the flexibility it needs to ensure fair matches, or at least interesting matches, even if that fair or interesting match might be a party of 4 versus 6 randoms, or some other configuration. Secondly, improve the post-match ranking adjustment such that personal performance and not team performance determine such. In other words, let experienced players concern themselves less with the performance of newer players on the team. Thirdly, improve parts and tier balance. A better balanced Robocraft is a healthier Robocraft with a greater pool of diverse yet viable build types available. This may require rethinking the role of certain gatekeepers whom filter the balance patches for the game. If these three things are significantly improved, then I would expect a gradual but sure increase in Robocraft 1 players, even as Robocraft 2 rises. This because the two games aren't competitors to each other, but potential partners. Well, that aside, thank you for listening, and if you do have thoughts on this, then do also let me know about them down in the comments below, and I will meet you there. And, of course, thank you for watching.